there are shadow forces in the world that, control things and do things that, the actors on the stage are really sometimes just reading a script.
If you think Trump works for the American people, nothing he's doing makes sense.
I'm not really sure the U.S. president is a sovereign entity. You're going to do exactly what we tell you to do. Or if you don't, recall what we did to Kennedy.
There is one country that is sovereign, which is the country where no corporation is bigger than their government.
I believe with very high certainty is that at some point they have to do another print. 3 trillion plus on the first one, 5 trillion plus on the second one. So this one's probably going to be 7, 8, 9, 10 trillion. Bitcoin fixes this.
My fear is Bitcoin doesn't fix it.
Today I'm joined by fund manager and author of the big print Lawrence Lepard and geopolitical expert Simon Dixon to discuss the CIA's deep state control, both now and reaching back decades, the next $10 trillion massive money printing cycle, and how BlackRock and Transnational Capital secretly control both politics and finance. I am Nathan with the BTC Mentor. Let's get into it. All right, good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. There's a lot to talk about today. It seems like things are maybe getting a little bit worse out there. Simon, I do want to get your latest updates on what you're seeing in the Iran conflict. Before we get there, Larry, for those that might not be aware, you are perhaps a little bit, maybe a couple of years older than me, and I'm curious what you're seeing out there, what your read on the situation is, and if it resembles anything in history that you've seen before.
It's got a little bit of everything, right? I mean, it's a little bit Cuban Missile Crisis-like. I was only 6 years old at the time. It's got some 9/11 elements to it, etc. I think we're going to talk about all this, but I think one of the most interesting things is kind of the question of who's pulling the strings here and who's really calling the shots. And I think Simon would agree with me, and I've watched a lot of his videos, have a lot of respect for the geopolitical analysis he's done. I know that there are shadow forces in the world that, control things and do things that, the actors on the stage are really sometimes just reading a script. And, if you go back and start with, I think the most notable one in my lifetime, I was young, but I remember it very well, was the murder of Kennedy by the CIA. And then, of course, more and more events since then have kind of proven that, I'm not really sure the U.S. president is a sovereign entity. I think he's kind of put there and has to do what he has to do. I'll relate a story. You both were younger when this occurred, but I just remember it like it was yesterday because I thought it was very interesting. If you recall, Barack Obama beat Hillary Clinton in the primaries because he was a peace candidate. He talked about shutting down Guantanamo. He talked about, ending all wars. He talked about not using drones. All of it. He was a peaceful guy, and he ran on that, and that's why he won. That's why he beat her. And of course, then we know what happened. He got into office and he reversed all those policies. And I think, what I think happened is, you get elected as he was, and, somebody from the CIA or the military industrial complex comes and has a nice little talk with you and explains how it's really going to be. It says, yeah, okay, the campaign's over now. You've got the position, and here's how it's really going to work. You're going to do exactly what we tell you to do. You can put it in nicer language, do it any way you like, but and if you do, it's all going to work out, and you're going to have a $16 million house on Martha's Vineyard and, write a $100 million memoir. Or if you don't, you can go the other direction and, you're going to, recall what we did to Kennedy. So, you think about it and you choose one, which direction do you want to go? And I don't think that model has necessarily changed. I think we're kind of seeing it play out real time, today. And so, but I'm very curious to get Simon's take on who we think is pulling Trump's strings and what the next moves are likely to be, because it's goddamn hard. And I have to say, right now I'm feeling pretty, good and confident, and I did my workout this morning and so on and so forth. But to the average person, seeing the president of your country wake up and tweet that, he's going to wipe another country off the map using nuclear weapons. That's disturbing. It's disturbing. It's inappropriate. It's scary. It's fear mongering. And, I get it. This guy likes attention, and this will definitely get him attention. But, my reaction is, shut the fuck up and stop it. It's completely irresponsible, and you're creating fear that doesn't need to be created. It's not good for humankind. So I guess I'll leave that as my introductory statement.
That's a damn good one. So, Simon, who are the actors in this play, and what's your latest take on the current situation, my friend?
Yeah, just a few comments on what you've said. I've been blessed because Bitcoin kind of put me in a position where I was able to retire early, and I invested in a lot of companies, and I kind of decided to unwind all that and just really dig deep into the geopolitical sphere. And it's what got me into Bitcoin in the first place, because I knew that banking was an absolute fraudulent Ponzi scheme. And that's what, helped me find Bitcoin. But it wasn't until I managed to sell my business to Coinbase and just really disconnect from all ties, that I was able to reflect back upon, my investment banking career and how we used to turn companies into structured products, how we used to laden them with debt as a tool for leverage, and just how you would construct what I call financial weapons of mass destruction, and just the complete cycle of a business from Silicon Valley to going public and everything in between. So I was really able to put some time in to model that. At the same time, I was willing to go down conspiracies and really try and figure out, what were behind them. And it's interesting you start at JFK, because I think it's a really interesting starting point. I think, you got to look at the Bank of England to the Fed, to really understand like the history, World War I, World War II. But if we really want to tie it into the situation we are at today, it was that regime change from JFK to Lyndon B. Johnson that really accelerated much of the trends that we're witnessing right now. So JFK was a big critic of the military-industrial complex. He was a big critic of what is now AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, and he wanted them to register as a foreign agent. And if you look at the mobs that were involved in the formation of the CIA, it kind of had a partnership between the post-World War II Hitler regime, as well as the Jewish mob and the Italian mafia. And they really came together and they were a part of what became the CIA. And later this evolved to the quote unquote deep state, really. And you can look through and you can realize that probably 10% of the CIA is about national security. 90% is the profiting from war, building back in order to extract resources, and then building the technology that we're kind of at today for like these police and surveillance state type of things. And I'd say 90% of what the CIA has always done has been for large corporate interests, and their job is effectively to burden the people with as much debt as possible, bankrupt the government, burden people with as much debt as possible, use corporate debt as a leverage mechanism to create these ginormous multinational corporations, and then take it to the end of a debt cycle and then use the military, the financial weapons, and the technology weapons to kind of go through this cycle. Now, all of it was involved in JFK because obviously there was the missile threat, the Cuban side. Right now, there is a terrorist attack on Cuba, weaponizing energy. Their hospitals are offline. They're not able to receive energy. That is a civilian attack. People aren't able to travel. They are ill right now. It is an absolute humanitarian crisis in Cuba. They're relying upon biofuels. And they were cut off their energy because they relied upon Venezuela, who was able to circumvent sanctions because they partnered with China, Russia, and Iran that had the leverage to be able to build alternative routes for getting energy to these sanctioned jurisdictions. So we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had the Israeli connection, we had the regime change because effectively let's call it the mafia, the CIA, Mossad, MI6 at the time, they regime changed JFK, and that led to the stealing of the highly enriched uranium that led to Israel having an illegal nuclear weapon. And that was all as a result of these trafficking routes that happened to the organizations that are now known as the ADL and AIPAC and all that stuff. So really the narrative around financial weapons of mass destruction came around that whole JFK assassination. We then had the 67 Six-Day War. We had the Vietnamese War that led to the bankruptcy of America, which effectively led to the debt default, where they said no one can convert their dollars to gold anymore. That led to the 1973 Yom Kippur War with Israel, which led to basically Nixon took America off the gold standard. The Vietnam War bankrupted America as well. And then in the 73 war, what happened? Well, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia actually did an oil embargo that led to the stagflation. And I believe the CIA and Mossad assassinated King Faisal, which led to effectively the petrodollar. And that is when we had, the removal of the connection to gold. Then we had the petrodollar. Then we enter into this crazy fiat currency standard, where crisis after crisis, we lead to your topic that the only way of solving this is through the big. So it all connects like through that history. But when we ended up with the Iranian Revolution, the history of Iran is effectively one of CIA and MI6 regime change. Iran had a democracy. And in 1953, when British Petroleum didn't want Iran's oil to be nationalized, it replaced the democracy with an installed puppet regime. We went through all of this history. But around about the Iranian Revolution, we had the Iran-Contra affair, which I think sets the framework up for where we are now. It was very controversial because the CIA released a bunch of documents, and it showed that Iran, Israel, and US were involved in an intelligence operation that led to the Iranian Revolution and a swap of the hostages for weapons that were then trafficked via Israel to Iran, and then Iran would deliver them into Central South America via the Contras. And the CIA was funding these militia groups in order to get the drug trafficking into America that funds the black op operations of the CIA. I believe all those operations still exist today. And there is an old guard that kind of relied upon trillions of dollars was printed, war after war, destabilization campaign, when it comes from Libya to Sudan to Iraq to Afghanistan, to Sudan, all of the different things. If you think about that entire 40-year history since the Iranian Revolution, Israel and Iran never went to war. But Iran was always 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb, and Israel was always projecting that Iran is about to attack them. And that led to the justification of all of the different wars, $10 trillion of money printing. But it wasn't until after October the 7th that we had, for the very first time, Iran and Israel actually exchange fires at each other. I believe this is the dismantling of the old guard, which is the military-industrial complex profiting from forever wars in the Middle East. And in order to dismantle that narrative, there are three factions of power that prop it up. One is the whole Zionist Israel, we're protecting the Jews, we recruit the IDF, but really we're creating chaos around the region. The other is the neocon Zionist narrative within America, represented by Lindsey Graham as like a cartoon meme of always justifying war. But then you had the resistance economy that IRGC built, which is the strategic tension. It's the death to America, death to Israel meme that effectively led to the funding of the different proxy groups, and then the justification for this continual state of war and this continual state of destabilization that effectively gave America its global hegemon, prevented the region unifying around their resources, because they knew that if they unified around their resources, they would go eastwards and they would lean into China and they would lean into Russia. and that was unacceptable for the American empire. So, that kind of brings us where we are right now. Who controls
You're
Trump?
suggesting actually that we almost needed the IRGC to exist in order for the system to work in the way they wanted it to work, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So you always have, if you read things like Operation Gladio, which is where this concept of creating militia armies in order to manufacture a fake enemy, like they did during the Cold War and communism. They would always put American armies, because even if you go far back as 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution, that was funded by Wall Street, and the same people that were on the Reichsbank in Germany, the Warburg brothers were also the governor of the Federal Reserve, was also funding the Soviet Union and the Bolshevik Revolution. And that was the year that the British Empire declared Palestine as a nation, to the Rothschilds, that led to the creation of Israel. The Balfour Declaration, correct. So the Operation Gladio is about, you create strategic tension, you fund militia groups, you manufacture through the media a fake enemy, and then you justify, the trillions of dollars of money printing that results from believing that you're always at a threat. And so IRGC at the hardliner level, Israel in terms of its narrative, and then the military industrial complex in America, they provided the narrative that's needed to always believe that you need to print more money and spend more money on the military.
Yeah. So I don't want to go there in this show because we don't have time and it's not really productive, but I'd love to spend an hour with you talking about 9/11, but because it seems like a very similar model. But for the sake of the listeners, and because we don't have 10 hours to do this in, I'd be very curious to understand where you think we are now and what, how it's playing. I mean, I completely agree with your view that we're moving to a multipolar world. That's obvious. The dollar has to die, in terms of, the petrodollar has to die, etc. I mean, some would almost arguably say that, this whole Mad King Trump thing is an act in order to have it die and have us get shoved out of the Middle East and go back to a sounder money kind of gold standard. And do you agree with that? And if that's the case, I noticed this morning, you said you weren't very troubled at all by Trump's apocalyptic tweet this morning. I kind of had the same reaction, but I'm not really sure why. But it feels to me, I mean, if you look at what Vance is saying, and he's over, I believe, in Budapest in Hungary, and saying my guess is we're getting set up here for some kind of a peace deal in the next couple of days, and Trump's going to declare an enormous victory and explain why he wants the Nobel. I mean, is that kind of how it feels to you, or how do you see these more recent developments?
Yeah, but I have to have a bit more nuance there, because I constantly fluctuate between my humanitarian hat and my analytical hat. And the both are in complete opposite directions. The deaths are real. The tragedy is real. It's disgusting. It's a humanitarian crisis. But the military industrial complex, they're the type of people that would manufacture weapons that are made specifically for 7-year-old kids that have smaller, there is a zero ethics environment in terms of this manufacturing of war. And so in the humanitarian side, that is real. There were 165 children that were murdered on the first day of the Iran war at a children's school, girls aged between 6 and 12. Those are all real deaths. There was a humanitarian starvation famine campaign in Gaza. These are real human tragedies and disasters. But on the analytical side, there is, in my perspective, real power and fake power. I think we've hit a stage where America and the collective West, through the process of financialization, securitization, globalization, and this debt-based Ponzi scheme that is central banking, have been fully captured by private corporate interests. Now, you sound like a radical lefty or something like that. I'm apolitical. I don't buy into these left versus right narratives or anything like that. people think I've got Trump derangement syndrome, but I also had Biden derangement syndrome and Keir Starmer derangement syndrome and, Clinton derangement syndrome. So whoever the leader is, you kind of get pushed into this team sports. But I believe the West is fully captured when we went into this globalization, America destroyed its manufacturing base. China became the global manufacturing base, and America became energy independent. That broke the whole system because effectively China is needing energy. It buys it from the Gulf sovereign wealth funds and the large energy producers. And then America is now competing with the previous big oil and sovereign wealth funds. So what happened is Saudi effectively stopped buying treasuries and started buying equities. And so now America has effectively sold $65 trillion of its assets to foreign sovereign wealth funds and foreign investors. And there is a financial industrial complex that I call transnational capital. It consists of institutions like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. It consists of partnerships with sovereign wealth funds, Norway in Europe, Singapore in ASEAN, the Gulf countries in the Middle East. And there is one country that is sovereign to a degree right now, which is the country where no corporation is bigger than their government, the CCP. They have a state banking system. They have a manufacturing base, and they're trying to become oil independent or energy independent through alternative renewable energies. There is one sovereign country in the world right now, which is China. So China is dictating terms because all the sovereign wealth funds rely upon them purchasing energy. And then that lies into investments in the capital markets. And then what happens in America or the West, you have three main powers: technology, which is algorithms and control over media; finance, which is leverage through financial weapons of mass destruction, derivatives; private equity, private credit; central banking, retail banking, investment banking, asset management. And then you have military. But the military are public companies. So while they get a degree of autonomy because they're funded by the Pentagon, they still are public companies, so they rely upon this financial industrial complex. So I call it a FIC, MIC, and TIC: financial industrial complex, military industrial complex, and technical industrial complex.
Uh-huh.
I believe that transnational capital, through lobby, controls Senate, Congress, and through the military and deep state are able to bribe judicial. So everything you see in politics is theatrical uniparty. You get a little bit of left and right that looks like internal difference, but the same financial industrial complex benefits.
Yeah.
And I believe that Trump is very aligned with the financial industrial complex. Biden was very aligned with the military industrial complex, the neocon faction of the world. And I believe that the financial industrial complex want a drastic change in the Middle East, a transition to regional stability and the end of the forever war, because the Gulf countries have co-opted BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and China is now dictating terms. And America can't just blow up the region and prop up the petrodollar. Right. So I think everything we've seen over the last 5 years, even when it goes from closed border to open borders, I believe Trump was installed for a specific purpose. I think tariff policy was BlackRock's policy. I think Russia already won the war before Trump was installed. I think that China already won the trade war, and tariffs was the reset of the world order. And I think Iran effectively is escalating this through the closure of Strait of Hormuz for the final battle that leads to a pre-negotiated outcome and deal. But you need to use the US military, Israeli military, and IRGC to effectively get rid of all the US infrastructure in the Middle East, which IRGC is doing. Israel's getting rid of the proxies that are going to be integrated, like Lebanon will integrate with Hezbollah eventually. Anyone's not on board goes. And effectively, America is destroying Iranian infrastructure And within Iran, you'll notice there's a difference between the IRGC and the government. The government is aligned with China. IRGC are deciding who needs to go in order to move to this new transition. And we're seeing a big theatrical but real and dangerous war in order to manage that transition that really becomes like a fall of the Berlin Wall moment. I don't think Trump knows exactly what comes next, which is why he's so radical in terms of his rhetoric. But this, I do believe, is an escalate to de-escalate. And on April the 15th, Xi Jinping and Trump were meant to meet. That was delayed by a month. And so on May the 14th, Xi Jinping and Trump are meant to meet at the China summit. And I think that will mark the world order, and this will be wrapped up and done by then.
When I first got into Bitcoin, I was overwhelmed. The jargon, the security risks, the fear that one mistake could cost everything. I remember staring at my screen and wondering, are my keys safe? Did I do this right? That experience is why I started BTC Sessions. For over a decade, this channel has helped millions of people like you learn how to use and secure Bitcoin. But I realized something. For many people, videos aren't enough. Everyone learns differently. Some need to ask questions in real time as an expert walks through their setup, their goals, and their threat model. And certain things like advanced cold storage, inheritance planning, privacy, and node or mining setups often can't be fully solved by watching another tutorial. So I built BTC Mentor. I recruited the best Bitcoin educators on the planet to work with you one-on-one. Real experts, real answers, personalized hands-on guidance tailored to your exact situation. Whether you're brand new or building a complex setup, we meet you where you're at and walk with you step by step. By the end, you don't just hope your Bitcoin is safe, you know it is. If you're ready for that level of confidence, then head to btcmentor.io and book a call with us today.
That sounds good. So what do you think? Let's dial it down to the next couple of days. I mean, how do you envision? I mean, he gets increasingly bellicose as he's losing, and he's obviously threatening a nuclear holocaust, which I know he can't do, because the military and others would stop him. But is it a taco as I described with JD Vance, pulling a rabbit out of the hat and saying we've agreed to a 30-day ceasefire? I mean, is that kind of what you would envision happening?
Yeah, so let's look at what we've seen. So the Strait of Hormuz is the economic nuclear weapon, as I'm sure you know from your financial analysis. Yeah. So that's closed. So we know that there's a genuine, clock in terms of economic reality, and the humanitarian crisis that will result from this in terms of supply chains. So we know that this can't be an Iraq model, a Syria model, an Afghanistan model. This can't go on for 20 years.
Right.
This has to end soon.
Right.
What do we know? We know that Iran is a natural fortress in terms of its surrounding by mountains. Right. We know that most of their infrastructure is underground. Right. We know that they have partnerships with Russian intelligence and Chinese intelligence. We know that the Strait is open for China and Iran. We know that Russia's making a lot of money right now, supporting Asia. We know that certain companies in America are making a lot of money, not America as a nation, but, Golden Pass, Cheniere Energy, Chevron, Exxon, a lot of these force majeure contracts are leading to renegotiations at higher prices. We know Europe is screwed, so they're being vassalized. We know that there is asymmetric war right now where the investment from Iran has been in drones and missiles. And we know that large battleships don't solve that problem. Right. So all you can do is you can use intelligence like Mossad and CIA to do strategic decapitation campaigns, which is what we've seen. We've seen a lot of IRGC leadership, and we've seen various, forms of regime change happen. But IRGC has still been destroying GCC infrastructure. IRGC has still got the Strait of Hormuz closed. We know that there is, significant damage being inflicted upon Israel as well as the Gulf countries. And so there is no solution to that. There is only a deal. America can't suddenly change its military, but it can destroy a lot of the infrastructure. So what does that mean? That's the Build Back Better model. Who's going to build it back? Well, across the Gulf countries, across Iran, across the whole region, it's only China that can rebuild that back, with Bangladeshis and Indonesians and Filipino labor. But the banks want their deal in. So they need as much damage to give for example, they were forerunning all the deals when Syria sanctions were removed. The same's happening with Iran. And so eventually we get to a deal. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but what's interesting is we've seen a 15-point deal from America. And then we saw a 10-point deal from Iran.
Yeah.
And somewhere we're going to meet in the middle. But what are the main focus is really around the economic model. It's not about anything we were told it is. It's not about regime change. It's not about nuclear weapons. It's not about ballistic missiles. It's all around ports, control of routes, and the removal of sanctions, which is another way of saying opening up new gas pipelines and oil infrastructure. So a deal will be done. And I think just like we saw during the 12-day war, there was a three-way victory. So we had a Hollywood movie where effectively B-2 bombers were sent over from Trump. He said he destroyed the nuclear program. We got all the Hollywood cinematic videos, playing from Pete Hegseth. Israel kind of said, that we defended we took out the leadership. We did a part of our regime change, but there's more to do. And Iran effectively said, we managed to actually get take out the Iron Dome and penetrate. And all of them took that three-way victory. But by the end of it, Israel was loaded up with debt, with ruined infrastructure and ports that don't work anymore. Iran had the same. And America had a Hollywood movie. So by the end of this, I think Israel gets vassalized into a Build Back Better model that regime changes Israel. The same, Iran keeps the IRGC, but it's got a tamer version that's aligned with China. And we need a Hollywood movie in order to get to the final stage. Now, I don't know whether there's more decapitation campaigns to come, whether the IRGC has put up a bigger resistance than they anticipated. I don't know how many things are going wrong. I just believe that nothing stops this train in the end, to quote Lynn Alden, in a different context here. And so I believe that even the rescue mission, there was some people are speculating that was a failed ground invasion. And then they were trying to get some nuclear enrichment. I'm not a military expert, but I listen to others that have their theories around that. All I know is that we are leading up to the final acts. There is genuine here. I don't believe we're going to a catastrophic Great Depression and demand destruction that ruins the world for the next decade. I don't believe we're going into genuine World War III because America can't manufacture a weapon without China right now. Right. So that's a reality. And so the only thing is a negotiated outcome with a Hollywood movie, and I think escalate to de-escalate. And maybe we've got that for the rest of April. Or maybe we get that now. That's the hard bit to predict.
If I may quickly jump in, Simon, because the one thing that immediately struck me with this idea of like a Hollywood ending and like escalating to de-escalating, you talked about nuclear being off the table. I'm curious why you think that nuclear is in fact off the table. And in terms of the most Hollywood ending I could possibly think of, it's Israel runs out of interceptors and threatens the Samson option and threatens nuclear. And then America rushes to find a deal to stop somebody from moving to a nuclear option.
Yeah, my belief is, and it's a belief, that nuclear is nuclear for all markets, and I don't believe the financial industrial complex wants to do that. And I don't believe Israel rules the world. I think they are subjected to the same power structure as UK, Europe, America, and the same power structure. So I think Netanyahu is a puppet as much as Trump is a puppet. Now, definitely Israel is more aligned with the military industrial complex, and Trump, I think, is more aligned with the financial industrial complex and technical industrial complex. But you're starting to see already Netanyahu has been negotiating his exit because there's likely to be, he's going to be the fall guy. There will be a regime change. And what is the new vision of Israel if it's no longer used to destabilize the region? Well, to me, it's pretty obvious. You use Israel as you use UAE for finance to get a foothold in jurisdictions of the multipolar world. UAE is your mechanism for getting into GCC. So you vassalize UAE, and then you do the same for India. And so you've seen that Israel has moved towards India. India is obviously the next strategic tension between China and China and India are the two potential future manufacturing bases. And so what I think you're seeing is Israel moves over towards latching on to India in the BRICS world. And then I don't think we get the blowing up of a nuke. My suspicion, again, is if you go back to JFK, if you go back to Numik, if you go back to military connection to Israel and the nuclear bomb, I believe the same deep state that controls America's nuclear program is the same deep state that controls Israel's nuclear program. Is my personal belief.
Larry?
Interesting. So, well, I'm glad to hear you say that, and I hope you're right, because there are times when you wonder, if there aren't some crazy actors in this whole drama, and if somebody doesn't go rogue. I mean, certainly a nuclear exchange would be a very, very bad thing. And
Lawrence, have you ever modeled out what you think would happen to markets if a nuke is fired either by Israel or
I have. I'm pretty sure we'd see everything down, 50 to 75%, almost immediately. And that the printing would follow, and then probably the currency would fail. And we'd, potentially have to move into kind of a, eat what you kill kind of mode. I mean, I think we'd probably survive, but there would certainly be millions of deaths in certain places where people were unable to be, get fed or have water. It's somewhere you just don't want to go. So I hope and I pray that we never go in that direction. As you point out,
because some people.
No, go. You go.
Yeah, some people believe, people have kind of mapped out their understanding of the world. I've laid out my map of the understanding, but some people believe Israel rules the world. They'll blow up a nuke. They'll kill the US empire, and somehow they emerge as a world power, which I think is completely. It just doesn't face. I don't see that as reality.
Yeah, I think
other people believe.
Yeah,
you comment on that one then.
Yeah. So I grew up in, duck and cover drills in the United States. I mean, I still believe in mutually assured destruction. And that what prevents Israel from nuking Iran or the U.S. from nuking Iran is the knowledge that China and Russia can nuke us. And I think, I hope and I pray that, what we learned from the illegal dropping of the bombs in World War II is that, this doesn't end well for anybody, and these can never be used again. And so I still believe that's the base case, absent, a madman getting in there. And I think there are enough checks and balances on the madman. I mean, I think that, let's say Trump were crazy enough to call for a nuclear strike. I'm guessing his military wouldn't let him do it, that they would stop him. So and I don't think he's that much of a madman. I think he's a buffoon, and I think he's an idiot, but I don't think I don't think he wants to die. So, I think I'm pretty much broadly aligned with your vision of how this plays out. But there could be some more stupid moves between here and there. I mean, I I read the stuff about the potential. This was a grab of the fissile material, and Trump likes playing with these toys, and he's got Hegseth in there egging him on, and he's got Bibi egging him on, and it wouldn't surprise me if we have to lose some soldiers, which is tragic. It's like the school kids, which I mean I don't even know. Do you have any view on whether or not there was a double tap going on there? I mean, some say there was, some say there wasn't. That they hit the school, and then when all the parents and first responders got there, they hit it again. Do you know if that's true or not? I don't know.
I think it's hard to say what is true, what isn't true. We're in the fog of war. I've been following every second of it. I have opinions, but I try to stick to what is the bigger picture of where this is going. I think when I get into the micro details and start speculating on them, it can go a little bit funky because there's just too many.
It's too hard to tell.
I think people will know the truth eventually, but is it beyond the US military, the Israeli military, to do insane crimes against humanity? I think everyone got the answer from watching Gaza.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. So it's, the whole thing is incredibly tragic and incredibly scary and hurtful. I mean, I've got kids in their 20s and they're scared. And I'm like, look, this is, cooler heads will prevail. The world's not going to end. But you're watching the reordering of great powers, and this shit is messy. It's extremely messy, and in a Twitter or true social age where you've got a president who uses behaving in an unhinged way as a negotiating tactic, it's going to trigger a lot of people on both sides. And I mean, God knows I got people on my thread on Twitter saying he's the second coming of Christ and you have to do this. And, they killed 45,000 protesters, which we all know is a lie. They killed some protesters for sure, but were those protesters, provoked by Mossad? Maybe. And, the propaganda on both sides is pretty bad. And I just, in general, I mean, while I don't, love the Iranian regime or the Russian regime or even the US regime, it's these great powers fighting over each other. I think the average human being in the world just wants to live safely, raise their children, live in peace, and do constructive shit. But sadly, psychopaths exist throughout society, and further sadly, a lot of them seem to figure out how to get into politics and positions of power. And so, that combination, creates a lot of misery for other people, and and death, and it's just incredibly tragic. And it goes back to something you and I have as a core belief. And I know you were in it in 2011. I didn't buy my first one until 2013, but I wrote the book because I truly do believe that Bitcoin fixes this, which I know a lot of people claim is incredibly naive. But imagine a world where government can't print money and the only thing that has real value cannot be destroyed. There's nobody who, I mean, let's take a look at this war. Let's say, Trump just put the defense budget up to 1.5, up from, under $1 trillion. If you divide that by the number of American families, I mean, you're telling every American family you're going to pay another $5,000 or $10,000 for this war. Nobody would agree to that. I mean, they say we're struggling to get by right now. We can't buy gas. We can't buy groceries. I'm not paying another $10,000 to have this war. And yet that's what we did. Now, we didn't do it through direct taxation. Of course, we did it indirectly because they'll print the money to pay for it. So, it's a really, really broken system. And as I'm sure and understand and believe, I mean, we were at one of those fourth turning inflection points where, sadly, it's got to get worse, so that we all rise up and kill it in so much as we ever can, and move back to a system that's a lot fairer. And I think that starts at the monetary layer, and that's why I wrote the book. But I know, you pretty much agree with these thoughts, I believe. So
I want to jump in there just for a second quick, if I can, because on that note then, Larry, I'm curious, with Simon's framework that he's laid out here, how does this model fit in with your big print theory? Because like the one thing I saw was like, oh, it's kind of going the opposite direction, that if China's doing the rebuilding, well, then they're the one financing it, they're the one taking out debt possibly to do it, or financing it from their own wealth. But I'm curious how this plays into the big print, if at all.
Well, I think obviously everything they're doing is extremely expensive. And it's interesting to me the way that when the debt level gets to a level at which it cannot be serviced anymore, without additional underlying money supply growth, because it is a Ponzi scheme. You've got to, when you take out new debt to spur growth, you need to create more money to service the interest and payment on that debt. And there's a great chart that's on my thread if you go back a few months, and I've done it in a lot of other podcasts where I show it's a chart by Dan Oliver at Murmacan that shows that at any point in time when the money supply hasn't grown enough compared to the debt level, something breaks and then they print. And so the chart shows in 2008, that's exactly what happened. And of course, they had a big print then. It took a few years and it was $3 trillion. But then, they tightened up in 15 and 16, and Yellen and Powell did their best. And we came into 19 and repo blew out and Powell had to pivot, and bingo, very conveniently, the scamdemic arrived, and we had to shut the whole world economy down, and then we had to print another 5 trillion. And so, my suspicion is that what's coming is another one of those. I don't know if it's, if it's based on a war, it's based on, the debt markets collapsing. I mean, we don't know how it's been written up and orchestrated. But what we do know, or what I believe with high certainty, because the lines have now crossed again, the base money supply has not grown fast enough to support the debt level. And the chart shows that. What I believe with very high certainty is that at some point they have to do another print. And if the pattern repeats, it'll be bigger than the last one. So we did 3 million in the first one, trillion. 3 trillion plus in the first one, 5 trillion plus in the second one. So this one's probably going to be 7, 8, 9, 10 trillion. And, that'll keep the system functioning, but it will also lead to, inflation like we just had. And the first one created, inflation of financial assets because, they sanitized it. They started paying interest on excess reserves, and so it didn't creep out into the economy. And so all the financial assets got, inflated, but we didn't have as much CPI inflation. The second one, the pandemic, they literally printed money and sent it out in stimmy checks, and the size was larger, and so M2 ballooned 40%, and we had huge inflation. And my sense is this one's going to be even worse. So, to me, we live in an inflationary area. I know from listening to Simon's prior podcast that, he believes the only two assets that are going to protect you in this world are the only two sovereign non-controlled forms of money, and those are gold and Bitcoin. And that's exactly where I am, in self-custody in both cases. I know he's exited all his other equity investments. I still have equity investments in gold and silver miners because I run a legacy fund and I have clients. And so that takes a lot of my time. But actually, I intend to ultimately wind away from that and get out of that business as well. Primarily because, you've got management risk in those companies. And, this is, in my view, this is actually going to be a pretty chaotic period. And, I don't want to go full mandibles, on everybody, but I think people need to understand that, things could get kind of messy and ugly in society, in terms of haves and have-nots, and, food and water and everything else. And so some of the thoughts that the preppers have with respect to, preparing for the future, so to speak, don't seem, stupid or far-fetched to me. I mean, I think that, I hope and I pray that, we don't get into a situation where everything's really that bad, but it's, it could be pretty ugly. I think at a minimum, I think as a best case, and I was hoping that we don't have a World War III, and I don't think we will. As a best case, we just get through this with a currency failure, with the dollar more or less effectively failing, and everybody realizing why it failed. It failed because the government was out of control, couldn't stop spending money. And we transition, I've said in prior podcasts, I think, probably the timing is about perfect for President Saylor in 2032. And he comes in and he says, look, I've got the receipts. I understand how it all happened. Here are the mistakes we made. We built a great world up until 1971 or 1946 or 1913. In generally speaking, the world operated and made a lot of progress on the gold standard. And Bitcoin is digital gold, and it's better. It's easier to verify, move, etc., store. And we are going to return to a Bitcoin standard. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to devalue all this debt and start over again. And so my grandkids will be paying for things in Satoshis. That's kind of where I think we're going. But, between now and 2032 is, that's a long 7 years or, 6 years. So, it's, and a lot of bad shit can happen, and probably some of it will, sadly. So
CoinKite has been in the game for years, creating hands down the best and most secure hardware when it comes to securing your Bitcoin. The Cold Card Q is an absolute powerhouse and my daily driver, and it's ideal for newcomers and advanced users alike. The Tap Signer gives you a low-cost, user-friendly option for those just getting started or for convenience when traveling. You can head to coinkite.com and use code BTC Sessions for discounts, or simply scan the QR code on the screen to get started right away. One company I like pointing people to when they ask about Bitcoin mining is Abundant Mines. They were founded by Bo and Christine Turner after losing over $500,000 to broken promises in the mining industry. And they built their hosting model to remove the usual headaches. With Abundant Mines, you own your machines and keep 100% of the Bitcoin you mine. There's no revenue share, no hidden skims. Pricing is simple. One flat monthly fee covers power, parts, labor, and repairs. They also guarantee uptime. If a machine goes down, their hash rate redirect system routes hash power from their fleet, so earnings don't just stop. And every machine is insured at full replacement value. Everything is hosted in the US, powered by Hydro, and mining equipment may qualify for 100% year one bonus depreciation. Learn more at abundantmines.com/sessions.
Simon, I want to get your thoughts on that. And I also want to just quickly add in there as well, too. At the end of this, would that mean that there is less demand for dollars outside of the US, which would mean their ability to export inflation would go down? And that might also lead to the need to print and stimulus and things at home?
Yeah, I want to comment on a few things because everything you said, I agree with. Few nuances, and I'll pick those up. But firstly, I think we need to be aware of the psychological operations and the impact it's having on our psyche right now. We are effectively, empire is being unmasked, and we're finding out the whole world we thought and knew and understood is completely different to how it actually was. We're spending more time on technology that is really changing, I think, the makeup of how our brains function. We're getting all of this artificial intelligence. I've been on spaces with people where clearly they're reading AI in order to do their thinking. We have major, changes in the world. And I, for one, I watched the whole Gaza thing every day because I was involved in the anti-war movement. And it changed me as a human forever. Like I'll never be the same person I was after witnessing some of that. And all I had to do was observe it. I wasn't even there, So all I want to say is that there are these psychological operations, the need to be psychologically strong and see things for what they actually are. Is actually a really important thing. And I think we are creating some very strange scenarios with this technology. So it definitely needs some kind of reset. My fear is, and my belief is actually that Bitcoin doesn't fix it. Bitcoin gives the exit for people that want to leave, but I think the financial and technological powers are getting way more powerful. And I think they're partnering with China. And so I do believe that a multipolar world is a better world because of competition. But sadly, I had a long debate with Jeff Booth, which he's more on your side and more optimistic. I think financial powers and technology powers are getting more and more and more powerful. I don't think Bitcoin's going to fix the financial system, but it will provide the exit, and that's where I focus. And so I think the system is so corrupted in terms of anyone that becomes president, anyone that tries to do the right thing in politics. You're either regime changed, assassinated, told that you're a pedophile, or co-opted or forced into a leverage network. And so that's my base case, but I, prepare for a better future, I guess. But the way to think about it is to really think of Bitcoin and gold in self-custody as an exit, being more community driven. At the end of the day, if the government ain't going to help you and the system ain't going to fix itself, it comes down to you, your daughter, your children, your family, your local community and your supply chains. And so everyone, I think, needs to really focus in on that. And you're only going to solve this through community action. And if shit breaks down, is what's around you that really matters. And you can do incredibly well as a community. You can exit and you can build your parallel systems. And I think saving Bitcoin and self-custody into these weak moments is essential. It's going to be a lifeboat. If we get these issues with energy grids and electric grids, you also need to be hedging with gold in self-custody as well. So all of that is there. I think the inflation conversation is really tricky because everything is inflationary. You've got the supply shock, that's inflationary. You've got tariffs. People debated whether those were inflationary. You got the inevitable big print that Lawrence always talks about, that I do agree. You're looking at a $7 to $10 trillion this time. That's inflationary. That does push more K-shaped economy, asset inflation, consumer good inflation. That really pushes these two extremes of the haves and have-nots. And I don't see how that reverses. Just gets worse and worse and worse, I think. And so it's essential for you to do that. Now, do we create an environment where the rich are fine, they adjust to a multipolar world, they can afford their private jets, they've got their Bitcoin in self-custody, they can go anywhere? Well, probably. But do we end up in a demand destruction, deflationary cycle, mass unemployment, artificial intelligence taking Uber's jobs, everyone's jobs, all the service level jobs? Feels like we're moving in that direction. So this inflation might be offset by some kind of disinflation as well. So I'm not sure which direction it goes, but I do know that what are the options for offsetting the inflation? Well, you either tax more to take more money out of the system. That's not going to work so well. You get productivity growth through AI and robotics. That leads to a lot of unemployment. Or what else have you got? Try and get the price of oil down. Okay, well, you probably need to end the war in order to get the price of oil down. And that leads to a deal. So, I don't know any other way of dealing with the inflation other than the Fed buying, buying these assets and doing something that leads to a lot of unemployment. So be prepared. It's confusing.
Let's talk about the technology for a minute, though, because I think it's a very interesting lens to look at it all through. On the positive side, the invention of the and I talk about this in the book, the invention of the microprocessor started the process of decentralization. I mean, we had peak centralization World War II, right? We had, 20 billion people slaughtered, basically in a not a pointless war, but in a large world scale war, because one madman got control of a country. Kind of sounds somewhat familiar. We started decentralizing, a little bit thereafter, and it really got going with the invention of the semiconductor microprocessor, et cetera, and self-computing. And then the internet, and now kind of anyone can be the New York Times. I mean, we all are the New York Times. We are talking from different parts of the world, broadcasting to thousands of people all over the world. And the question I think it's going to get asked is, do we really need these big central organizations, and do we trust them? Can we all just kind of walk away from them? And ignore them. The flip of that is that, the Palantirs and the technological, I think you call it the TIC, right? The technological industrial complex, they want to know every single thing we do, track everything, have CBDCs, be all over our ass. And, hopefully the liberty-minded folks will, push back on that and will create solutions. I mean, Bitcoin, as an example, is a solution. I mean, they can't, without your keys, they can't steal your wealth. I mean, that's never really existed. I mean, as Safe and then Jason Lowery point out, I mean, armies could overrun other countries and take the money or take the people, and Bitcoin stops that. So, I guess I'm by nature an optimist on the human condition. I feel like we will move who says we need enormous nation states? I mean, I think it's an assumption we've all kind of lived with, but I think that can certainly break down, and sovereign individuals can move very quickly from place to place with their wealth. And, they'll tend to probably go to places where they're treated the best. As you point out, Simon, we're going to find these smaller communities with like-minded people, and you'll live there. And, if you're not willing to live in the big technocratic state that doesn't really offer you much and tracks every one of your movements and every one of your transactions, well, then those states are going to wither away. So I think the technology and the freedom offered by the technology will ultimately save mankind. I really do believe that, but I don't disagree that we're fighting a bunch of different trends. With respect to the AI and the employment thing, I mean, that reminds me of, the Luddites. I mean, in the sense that, figuring out how to do stuff better, cheaper, faster is never bad. I mean, that's good. Productivity increases are good for the human condition. I mean, the reason we all live as well as we do today is because of all the productivity increases we've had. Having said that, we've got to make sure to help people out along the way, to help them retrain, help them move into new things, etc. I mean, obviously in 1913, buggy whip manufacturers were screwed. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of other employment in the country to be had. And so, we will evolve in a positive way. And one of the things is actually, this is kind of a dark moment, this war and a lot of other things. And yet, I mean, to look at the bright side of it, I mean, I find the bright side of it that, basically, I think about 80% of the world condemns this shit. You know what I mean? I mean, I may have my percentages somewhat wrong, but, based on polls, based on Twitter, yeah, there's a 20% of the world that they're involved in a death cult, and they want to, their team A wants to kill team B and have a Hollywood ending and all the usual crap. But, most of the mature adults in the world don't want to do that shit. And so I view that as a real net positive. I mean, 80%, I mean, if the people in control are part of the 20%, okay, well, you got all this noise going on, but it's kind of like term limits, right? 80% of America wants term limits. We can't get them through because the people who are in a position to do it won't do it. But eventually we're going to throw those people out, and eventually I think the will of the people is going to win. So I guess I am optimistic in a multi-year time frame for coming into a better space, and and just getting rid of all this corruption and grift. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in America, and probably the same is true in the UK, who doesn't just look at this government and just say, this thing is so incredibly fucking broken. How can we not do better than this? I mean, it's horrific. I mean, I was reading over the weekend about how, Trump's sons have made $700 million in gains by investing in drone companies right before the war broke out. It's kind of, I mean, the grift everywhere is it's outrageous. I mean, Melania coin is down 97%. Trump coin is down 96%. I mean, it's just, I mean, what? The president of the United States and his family is benefiting. I mean, I'd love to see the trading records. I mean, who the hell was buying all the S&P futures or the oil futures long and short before all these major announcements? I mean, wouldn't you love to know what Howard Lutnick is trading? I mean, it's just, it's sick. It's just absolutely sick, some of the stuff that's going on. And so, I think that if and when we get some people who are reform oriented and just semi-normal, I mean, I'd hold my nose and vote for the other party, if I thought they were just, a step in the right direction compared to the corruption that we've got now. So, and I think most of the world feels that way. So I don't know. I try to be optimistic about it all, but from a day-to-day point of view and trying to manage a portfolio, that can swing 6 or 7% in a day based on, a tweet. It's like, I'm like, this is no way to run a railroad. This is a mess. So,
Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key understanding that people need to come to that helped me is that if you think Trump works for the American people, nothing he's doing makes sense. If you understand that he works for Mick, Tick, and Fick, you realize that he's building a technocratic Orwellian state nightmare. He's giving the funding to the technology companies and the government contracts to Palantir that's needed. He's got the budget up from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. and that's a stimulus check for the military industrial complex. And everything from tariffs to this war will lead to more concentration of power through big print, which leads to the financial industrial complex becoming more and more powerful. Every crisis made the financial institutions more powerful.
Yeah.
You know, from 2008, BlackRock got all the ETF business,
Yep.
and JP Morgan got a bunch of the banks.
All the banking business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, from the, you know, so you can see every crisis is concentrating it. So, and big oil in America, not the Americans, but big oil in America is doing incredibly well, and LNG will benefit a few companies.
Yeah.
So when you understand who he works for, he is actually doing a great job. But if you think he works for you, then you're doing a bad job. And I left UK, you know, I moved to an island a long time ago. I started preparing for this in 2015. Bitcoin gave me that privilege. And so, yeah, I think, you know, the fact that this decentralized technology and the fact that we get to self-custody, the fact that we do need to recognize from the Bitcoin experiment that we all need to run our own LLMs if we're using AI, and we need to create these decentralized networks, because there is a genuine level of disruption that happens to these big companies as well. So they may have a plan. It doesn't mean that they're going to win in their plan.
Right.
But this technology disrupts them just as much, and wars can go incredibly wrong. And, you know, finance in a multipolar world is increasingly challenging to manage as opposed to latching onto one empire. So yeah, we have an interesting time, but I do believe that when we get to this technology side, like, we hit a point where in 10 years, I think everyone needs a 10-year plan today if they haven't started. You know, they need to own more Bitcoin in self-custody. They need to own more gold into this weakness. They can't be speculating using leverage where they get blown up. They need to, you know, really start to think, what happens if my supply chains break? What is my relationship like? Am I spending too much time on technology and not really in the real world and stuff? So people have 10 years to kind of fight against where they're all driving us, because it really feels like there is this World Economic Forum vision of you will own nothing and be happy if you get this wrong. And you'll all be on devices, and we'll be using the algorithms to make you more and more radical in a certain direction and bring out the worst version of yourself. And inflation means you can't afford anything, and you hate the other sex. You're not having children. You know, there really does feel like that somebody has that type of agenda, and people
Absolutely.
need to deliberately exit.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely horrific. I mean, there are a lot of extremely scary trends, and we got to push back against it. And I've tried to counsel my kids on that, to detach and just live. Yeah.
I want to kind of tease that out a little bit, Simon, if I may too. We talked about basically transnational capital, military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, tech industrial complex, and we also like somebody has that agenda. Is it possible to actually get more granular? Do we know some of the people that are pulling these strings, or even just broadly speaking, we can identify the companies? How far can we go in terms of unmasking, pulling back the curtain, actually seeing who is directing this?
Yeah, so people always look for individuals and an organized cabal. I think it's actually it's more simple than that. When I've tried to find these answers, if you look at BlackRock, they now manage effectively. They're up to $14 trillion of assets under administration. Now, some of that's ETFs. A lot of that is not managed, is self-managed, various other things. But they also put the world on Aladdin. And Aladdin is used by $25 trillion of asset managers. That's central banks, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, endowment funds, basically the largest pools of capital all around the world. And so if you go into BlackRock's Aladdin and you ask it to scenario plan, Trump is going to blow up this or Iran's going to do that, it will give everyone in capital the same answers, and capital allocates algorithmically. I think we're even seeing right now the irrationality of the market. I think the stock market is it either believes there's a very quick solution or is vastly underestimated the severity of this. To me, I put that down to it's robots, it's algorithms, it's BlackRock's technology. And, then you have the largest sovereign wealth funds. In the case of Europe, you've got the Norwegian one, you got the Gulf ones. They've had a big hit from this, as obviously their economies have been significantly impacted. And then you've got the largest pool of capital, which is the China side. I believe that all of those pools of capital, they effectively control, when Elon wants to buy X, he ends up borrowing against his stock, which is the financial industrial complex. And then they go to the Gulf sovereign wealth funds, and then they're funded by China. So you can see these proxy funding mechanisms that make up transnational capital. And then suddenly the CEO of Saudi Aramco gets a board seat on BlackRock. And then politics changes. So you can kind of see, how, and BlackRock's essentially got 20,000 board seats now across their network of corporations. So you got $25 trillion in technology.
Well, it's the thinkest head of the WEF too, isn't he now?
Yeah, now Larry Fink is the interim chairman or whatever of the World Economic Forum. And who does, and then who does Larry Fink work for? So you've got that structure, right? Most people focus on the executives. Well, anyone that knows governance, that you have executives that work for boards that work for shareholders, and then shareholders use shell company through British colony offshore structures in order to obfuscate ownership. But BlackRock is approximately 45% owned by Bank of America, and then you have Merrill Lynch, and then you have legacy European finance families on top of that. But you can see that they all own shares in each other. And BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, up to the banking infrastructure, sovereign wealth funds, is institutionalized. So I don't think it's this organized cabal. I think there's layers of governance, but they are all governments, with the exception of, CCP and some of the ones that nationalize their oil resources. They're subordinate to transnational capital. And so I just don't see anything that a politician does as being not dictated by their lobby. And at the very, very worst, deep state operations like happened to JFK if you get too far out of line.
Yeah, that's right.
Larry, any thoughts?
No, I completely agree. I completely agree. I mean, it's they're all part of the same system, and it's been around for a long time. It's like Carlin said, it's a big club. We're not in it. And and they have to play within a certain set of boundaries. If they get too far out of those boundaries, they get in trouble. You see them get reined back in. It's interesting though. There are dissenters and leaks from the system. I mean, I've recently been very, very enthralled with this Maloney, this Italian PM, who has pushed back on some of the war stuff and just other things in general. And so there are,
they are a bunch of psychopaths, and they all do want to gain more power from each other. So it's a ruthless, brutal game at the top of lawlessness.
Yeah,
leverage and covert operations.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, look, when you have the militaries behind you, and you can do a lot of stuff, right? And that's why the regime change stuff that the U.S. has been doing for years. I mean, read the Devil's Chessboard. You look kind of through the history of the CIA, and you realize that the U.S. we're not always the good guys. I mean, we like to think we are, and there's some things about this country that are fabulous, and the founding documents were pretty unique, but we haven't always lived up to that standard, and sadly.
Well, I think that's an important point, because without truth, we're just using bad data. So in this unmasking moment, we're entering into a world where you're radically disjointed from reality because you kind of believe the old gods,
Right.
or you're in an algorithm that's turning you insane, or you're actually figuring out how the world works, which is why I really appreciate like these podcast spaces. And it's why like you really need to concentrate and stand at guard of your mind and filter what's coming in. Because you could be doom looping and doom scrolling all sorts of stuff. And if the content is being dictated to you, you're likely serving someone else's agenda. So you really need to find your people that you resonate with, that seem to be pushing out a message, and understand what alternative agendas they may have. And just follow the money is what I've always done. Like just understand that there are these incentive mechanisms. Follow the money. And to me, if someone's pushing you into Bitcoin in self-custody, then you either just believe, okay, they're trying to pump their bags, but come on, man, no one... I was around in Bitcoin where what I said was important. I'm irrelevant to what happens to Bitcoin at this stage. Like
we all are individually, and collectively we may not be.
I was gonna say, it doesn't matter how many people I teach to do self-custody. There's no way I'm moving that price point.
No,
exactly.
There are very few.
We could shield our backs is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I have people just trying to get people, boomers to buy ETFs. I have a hard time with it. So it's, we're still very early, sadly, in the migration to the sound money thesis. But you can see it's coming. It is building, and it's Lynn's nothing stops this train. It's just getting more and more true. I mean, I feel like, looking at the Bitcoin price and the gold price, we're on the cusp of a big move upward. I go back to that chart that I referenced earlier, where they've just got to get more money into the system. I mean, it's breaking. And it's interesting, we could talk a little bit about what I think is coming. Kevin Warsh will be Fed chairman, middle of next month. And, my sense is he didn't get that job unless he made certain promises and commitments. And so I think it's pretty certain that he will come up with a new program of some kind. He will have I don't know what they're going to call it. I'm not sure how they're going to do it, but very similar to what they did with Silicon Valley Bank, where, they've created BTFD, or, more recently they've got reserve management, which is really only QE, just rebranded. There's going to be a mechanism. There has to be mathematically a mechanism that allows them to inject more money into the system. I think it's going to be something along the lines of, it'll have a national security component to it, and it'll be very similar to what they did in World War I, where they said, buy Liberty bonds, and they let the banks borrow at 3%, and then they sold Liberty bonds at 3.5%, and the banks made 50 points free carry. And so I don't know what this will be, but it'll be something. I think there'll be something like that, where they'll say, hey, they don't want to put it on the Fed balance sheet because they know that we all know what that means. Although it would probably hit the sheet somehow. Maybe they'll figure out a way to keep it off the sheet, but where they'll say, hey, banks, we will give you these swap lines of this money at these low rates, but the quid pro quo is you will then use them to buy duration in the treasury market. And, which is effectively yield curve control. But it's not yield curve control via the Fed. It's yield curve control with the banks as the proxy in the middle. And there'll be a new name and a new term for it. And then, to the degree that anyone squawks, they'll just say, well, look, this is really just a matter of national security, because, we live in kind of an uncertain world, a wartime world, and we have to be able to finance the government going forward. And, please, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. So I feel like that's got to be coming, and it probably is likely this year. I mean, he could give that speech right after he's, appointed or confirmed. He could give it a couple months later, but I feel like it's coming this year. And I think those of us who understand how the money machine works and the levers at the Fed, the market is just the market for sound assets is just going to scream. I mean, gold's going to head towards 10,000, and Bitcoin's going to head towards 400,000, within, years, or months, and the first part of that. So, to me, that's what I think is kind of the next chapter. And so, I'm just sitting here waiting for, his confirmation and waiting to see what he unveils, because I'm pretty sure that's what's got to happen.
I'll say quickly, Simon, before you jump in there, I just wanted some clarification, Larry, on something you were saying. My understanding is that there is some limitation on the commercial bank's ability to hold treasuries. They have some sort of cap.
Well,
You're aware of
yeah, they
some,
have a SLR and some other restrictions, and I think that'll all get thrown out. You know,
yeah.
they'll just open it up and let them buy as much as they want, because they really have to. I mean, who else is going to hold the paper, right? So,
No, that makes perfect sense. Simon, your thoughts?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Again, concentration of power into financial industrial complex as a result of some favorable trade. Yeah, there's no doubt there was a regime change at the Fed. I think it's quite interesting that everyone, sees him as hawkish. I guess there's a couple of conspiracy theories. Either he just does what was meant to be done, which I think I'm more aligned with you, or others say that he's actually going to be hawkish and reset the world order and kill the US empire. I don't think that's happening. I think they print right till the end and they squeeze everything they can out of the US economy. They push the wealth inequality and K-shaped economy to asset strip absolutely everything, and everyone needs to protect themselves from it. And the government will lie throughout the whole process.
Oh, yeah.
And and tell you that this is MAGA and everything, but everyone just needs to have their own plan around that.
I mean,
but I think that's very feasible.
To be fair, the economy will keep rolling. Unemployment may be low. Even to the extent they're successful, they may be able to push wages up and help. I mean, if the money were directed at infrastructure and the correct things, there could be some quote unquote economic benefit. Very much the way that post World War II, we had a lot of inflation, right? When we had yield curve control until 1952, and then they took it off. And there were some months where the inflation was running at 19 or 20%. There were a couple of 1 month periods where that happened. But, we were coming out of the war, all the GIs came home, they're buying houses, they're buying cars, and the economy was cooking. So, the inflation sucked, but, there was at least everyone was working and there was growth. And so, when you're employed, I mean, the kind of the worst of all worlds is 29, where you're unemployed, you can't find a job, everything sucks, and, and prices have fallen, but not enough. If they have an inflationary crack up boom, obviously the inflation eats you alive and the people on fixed incomes get killed. But, if you're young and you're working, there'll probably be a lot of work for you, and wages will probably be going up pretty healthily. So, I mean, you're facing trade-offs, but in a system like the one we've got, it's inflate or die. I mean, Richard Russell said this years ago. It's really true. And, and they're pushing against this. I mean, you said you had a conversation with Jeff, who's a friend. They're pushing against a system that naturally creates deflation, but they've got a financial system that's designed where it has to have inflation. And so there's only one way to square that circle, and that's to print the goddamn money. So, you just know it's coming. What's so hard, and for me as somebody who's trying to help people get into Bitcoin, is it's incredibly hard to get people to think in 5-year timeframes in the world that we live in. Everyone thinks in months and quarters, and and you got the Peter Schiffs of the world dunking on Saylor because Bitcoin gold's outperformed Bitcoin for a few years, and it's like, okay, just relax. Let's take a 17-year view of it all. Bitcoin's going to bury gold. So, and by the way, I love both, as you guys know. I just like Bitcoin a little better. So to me, that's what we have to look forward to. And I don't know. Simon, I'd like to ask you though. I mean, at the end of the day, how do you think all this ends for Trump? I mean, where do you do you think he gets to write his Hollywood ending? Do you think is there any recovering from where he's gone? Because he really blew up his base. I mean, I was talking to my daughter about it yesterday, and sometimes I honestly think that what happened here was Israel ran the operation they ran, with Mossad, and they do have films of him with young girls. I mean, obviously really young girls. And they literally said to him, and, very much the way probably Obama got told, what he had to do if he wanted to stay alive. They very much said to him, look, man, it's just a simple call. You're either going to attack Iran or we're going to release all these films, and, you're going to jail and you're going down in history as the biggest pedophile known to man. I mean, how do you see Trump? How do you see it ending for Trump? What do you think? How do you think he got to this position where he betrayed his base in such an obvious way?
Yeah, again, this is why people call me TDS, because I know Trump's history and I studied Trump's history. But he was mentored by Roy Combs, and he married his daughter into the Charles Kushner family with Jared Kushner. And Charles Kushner was effectively Jeffrey Epstein before Jeffrey Epstein, if you look at his court documents. Huh. And so he's always been around these grooming operations into the Jeffrey Epstein network. Like Lex Wexner and Victoria's Secrets was like a grooming operation into these things. And when you make money in New York through real estate, you have to be connected to the mob and mafia to get these transactions. He did a bunch of laundering for Russian Jewish power via some of his Trump Towers and some of his real estate transactions. Jared Kushner is his son-in-law. And Charles Kushner, basically, if you look at some of his court documents, he ordered a prostitute for his brother, filmed it, and then blackmailed him in order to get what he wanted. He ended up in prison and went down for it, but I think he later got pardoned as well. But if you look at who Trump has always been around, he's always been in those Zionist circles. And I think he's leveraged to the tilt, always has been leveraged to the tilt. I think he didn't change. I think he's always been part of this. So his first administration furthered a lot. He took out Qasem Soleimani, which was the number one person that was killing ISIS, and then pretended like he's taking on ISIS, even though he took out the person that's killing ISIS. He, put the embassy in Jerusalem and changed it from international to effectively Israel. If you look at his funding, his three largest funders were Elon Musk, the technical industrial complex, the Mellon banking dynasty, the financial industrial complex, and Mariam Edelstein, which is the Israel military industrial complex side. So to me, his job is to get rich. His job was to be an agent of chaos. And he'll end with the presidency that effectively ended the post-World War II Bretton Woods order. Those that are clued on will say that was the when we moved to multipolarity and it was the end of the US empire. And his cult will say he took on the Fed, he took on the deep state, and they'll continue to buy his projects and look for Q drops and be in his cult for till the end of time. And then blame what happens next on the fact that, Trump didn't get to finish his mission. I do think he gets his Hollywood movie. I do think he declares victory. But I don't think he's able to do much more here than extract wealth, do more corrupt trades, funnel more money into the Middle East, and profit from this transition to multipolarity. So,
if I can, Simon, quickly, just for clarification, because I didn't quite follow, are you suggesting that Trump is corrupt or that he was compromised? And then additionally, Larry, to your earlier point, I had a nice conversation. Yeah, maybe both. I guess both. Had a nice conversation with Lou Groman the other day, and the thing that he pointed out to me that I thought was really interesting is how we view Bush today. And how you see him sitting with like Obama and laughing them up, and he's kind of like brought back into the limelight, and the corporate media holds him up. And so I wonder if Trump, even if he's vilified and destroys his legacy now, if basically the media industrial complex tries to prop him back up 10 years from now.
Oh, I don't know. I think it might be pretty hard to do, but yeah, I mean, there are all the memes on Twitter about how, Bush can now say he's not the dumbest president ever, which I always get a chuckle out of. And, I was very underwhelmed by Bush's presidency, and it really was the Cheney presidency. And they took the bait and fell for, wasting $8 trillion in the Middle East. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what his legacy will be. I gotta believe it's going to be pretty hard to resurrect, to be frank. I mean, when I look at the hole he's dug for himself, he may be loved in Israel, but other than that, I gotta think he's got an uphill slog to to restore his base. I mean, there are so many people. I mean, I was never MAGA. I was never anti-MAGA. I kind of tolerated the guy. I was never blue team. I've always been kind of libertarian. You guys probably know it. Supported Ron Paul in a big way. And I now support Thomas Massey in a big way. My view is that he in executing this pivot to become a warrior, he shot himself in the foot in a big way, in a really big way. And when you get on Twitter and you see, I mean, there's nobody more pissed off than these people. I campaigned for him. I voted for him 3 times. I did this, I mean, these people just absolutely positively loved him and now feel betrayed. And I get it. I mean, they bought into something that he didn't live up to. So I totally get it. I don't feel quite that way because I always, I remember him. I was doing business in the 80s and 90s, and I remember the stories of, all the casinos down on the Jersey Shore, and the way, I read the papers, and the way he stiffed all his contractors and just said, tough shit, I'm not paying you. And and cheating on his wife. And I mean, just his behavior, this is not some new secret. I mean, it's not like he hasn't left a trail of bodies for, his entire business career. So all you had to do was a little bit of research and you kind of could get a sense of what you were dealing with here. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for the MAGA people who say, oh, well, yeah, I was betrayed. Well, do your homework, but anyway, it is what it is. And he is who he is.
Simon?
Nathan, what I wanted to do is whenever I do these videos with you, people are like, that's bullshit. There's no, what's your actual sources and evidence? So I just wanted to say, I'll send you 4 links because obviously I can't source stuff, but I'll do one on the best, all the sources behind 9/11, the other on JFK, the other on Iran-Contra affair, and the other on Trump in his blackmail operations in the early days. So four different links of what I believe to be the actual source materials and court documents that will help you get beyond, oh, really? Is that just a conspiracy theory?
Yeah,
I will have all those in the description down below. Yes, thank you for that, Simon. Actually, quickly on that note, too, we have maybe a little bit of time. Lawrence, do you have any questions about any of those?
No, I don't. I was wondering though, Simon, I assume you've read all of Whitney Webb's work. Have you been through her stuff? Yeah.
Yes.
I have not. See, one of the disadvantages I've got, I'm still working. I'm still managing this fund. So I spend my day talking to companies and trying to understand who's got a good gold deposit. And so I haven't had, I listened to Simon, who's got this encyclopedic knowledge of, world history and events and geopolitics. And I watch the monetary side very carefully. But I haven't had as much time or to dig into these things. Although over time, a long time ago, I became a deep student of the JFK assassination. My father was a veteran. I remember saying to him, this is back 25 years ago, he's passed 30 years ago now. And I remember saying, Dad, you do realize the CIA killed, Kennedy, right? He went nuts. He went absolutely, because he just loved America and he refused to accept the possibility that our government could actually be that evil. And yet, if you took the time, I have books and things that were unpublished by people. I was a part of a community that really dove deep into that whole particular issue. And I am so absolutely certain of what happened there that, there's just no doubt in my mind. And yet, here's a loyal Midwestern businessman who served in the Army and was a good man. And I told him that, and he was pissed off at me. He thought I was way out of line. But, you've got to follow the evidence, and there's enough evidence on some of these things. And obviously Simon has taken the time to follow the evidence. I look forward to exploring some of those links.
Larry, just on that note, do you ever think most people will wake up? Like, does it have to be some sort of major pain point, or do you think it's always going to be kind of this Pareto distribution, 80-20, 20 that actually dive in and maybe
you mean wake up to sound money or wake up to all the broken stuff? I think a lot of people have woken up to the broken stuff. I know that, my 20-year-old son, 20-plus-year-old son is absolutely convinced that Kennedy was killed by the CIA. He, is very negative on Israel and their role. And his peer group all gets it too. This is not, I think there's a generational component here. If you're a big fat happy boomer who've lived within the system and you've got your wealth and life is good, and I mean, I was with one of my investors, very wealthy guy, the other day, nice guy, I like him, having a breakfast with him, and I said, how do you feel about the Iran war? He said, well, it's a problem. We're going to have to deal with them sooner or later. Might as well do it sooner. And I just was like, really? You haven't thought it through, but it's not going to affect his life, and he just reads the papers and believes the narrative, and I mean, they have said death to Israel, so therefore we ought to go attack them. And that's not uncommon in my age group, I don't think.
Yeah. No, same here with the Canadian Conservatives. It's quite frustrating that they can actually they can wake up to some aspects of sound money and government overreach, but that one is just a sacred cow that they can't seem to look past or see for what it really is. Before we kind of wrap, Simon, there was one other thing that I wanted to quickly touch on. We've got the May 14th, I think it's May 14th, 15th China Summit coming up here as well. Is there anything in your mind that viewers, that the audience can be on the lookout for that might signal we're getting that Hollywood ending? Is there anything in particular that you kind of theorize or think might pop up, or basically is it kind of one of those things like adult content when you see it,
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like the things that these psychopaths are willing to do, kind of always. It's like that. I'm not surprised, but when it actually happens, you're surprised. It's one of those things. Like, I still can't believe the things that they're willing to do. And when it actually happens, so and anything is on the table. My belief is that the economics don't make sense for this to be a long war. And I don't think a nuclear war makes sense. So the only thing that makes sense is a deal. And when I think about it, I think Xi Jinping, you don't get a press department for China. You don't have politics of trying to win the midterm election for China. And to not believe that these, Iran as a 6,000 year culture that took on the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and is still there. And China, which has been through the century of humiliation, dynasty after dynasty, and Russia, who's been through, everything that it's been through. Then you have these long-term leaders. To not think that they didn't have a very intelligent long-term plan, I think is infeasible. And I think you can see it executing. I think Russia won the war with Ukraine. I think China won the trade war with America. And I think Iran won this war through the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But who really is in charge here? I think it's obvious that the American military relies upon rare earth minerals from China. Iran relies upon oil purchases from China. Russia relies upon sanction relief from China. The Gulf countries rely upon oil purchases from China. The entire world relies upon exports from China. And there are 110 countries that have connected into the CIPS Chinese payment system. There were 26 negotiations with trade routes and ports between BlackRock and China. Yep. And there is a new military industrial complex that has drone, missile, and new technology, and a $1.5 trillion Belt and Road Initiative that's not regime changing, not destroying countries, not telling them how to do things, just building infrastructure and asking them to buy their products. The fact that I think Xi Jinping is the one that has a real plan, and that's the one that was playing the 6D chess. So look out for that meeting. If it moves, I'm a bit concerned because it means that we got more destruction and more economic destruction. If it happens, I'm pretty sure this needs to be wrapped up before then. If this is still going on when that meeting is happening, then there's something I missed, and I need to come back here and tell you what I got.
Awesome. I love it. Simon, tell everybody where they can find you, and then Larry, you as well.
So at Simon Dixon Twit on X from when it was called Twitter. And then I publish everything on my YouTube channel, Simon Dixon 21. And in case I get cancelled on anything, I back everything up at simondixon.com.
Beautiful, Larry.
Lawrence Lepard on X/Twitter, and I have a website, ema2.com, where there's a newsletter that I write quarterly talking about the economic picture. That's free. It's historically, you can see it. There's at the bottom of the page, you can put your email in there, and we'll never spam you. You'll get it automatically every quarter. So.
Amazing. And don't forget to pick up the big print.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. The book explains the monetary side of what's about to happen.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Just wanted to quickly let you know we're going to be doing our annual Bitcoin survival workshop covering how to privately use and acquire Bitcoin June 28th in Banff. You can scan the QR code or check the link in the description to learn more. Would love to have you there. If you enjoyed this video with Larry Lepard and Simon Dixon, please do like and subscribe. It really helps us out. And check out the previous video with macro legends Lynn Alden and Luke Roman.